And I appreciate the committee members who are here. And we'd like for Scott Spivey, the Executive Director of Mississippi Home Corps, to come up, and you can sit you can sit right there if you like, and to talk to us about the programs and where we are. And I know Senator Horn is coming, and he wants to talk specifically about that, the tax credit. And I want to say before you get started, Scott, that I have truly enjoyed working with you over the last 4 years, attending the Mississippi Home Corps meetings on the advisory committee, and you're always being responsive to me for my constituents. And I especially appreciated working with you in the rental assistance program that helped so many of our constituents throughout the pandemic, the home mortgage program as well. And then you can also talk to us a little bit about the energy assistance program, so that as we start this winter season and our constituents need assistance, you can tell them what we need to tell them.
Well, thank you, Senator. And that's certainly a two-way street. I didn't know that the past 4 years were going to be as exciting in housing as they ended up being with the pandemic programs. We're certainly proud at the Home Corporation of being able to get out over 250, almost $300 million in rental assistance and close to $70 million in mortgage assistance for people who weren't able to pay their rent and weren't able to pay their mortgages due to becoming unemployed due to the pandemic and falling behind. And I think one of the things that the pandemic uncovered is the tenuous state that renters around the country find themselves in. And it kind of brought that into sharp focus nationwide, not just in lower income states like Mississippi, not just in rural areas, but also in urban areas. And it's kind of a universal issue. That's one of the reasons why tenant-based rental assistance is going to be one of the programs that we run using our home ARP grant. So there's a special home ARP plan that we've submitted to HUD that we plan to get back. And we'll use a portion of that, I believe, is our proposal to continue some tenant-based rental assistance, because some people often find themselves in a situation where they could be homeless. And that has all sorts of outcomes on health, that has outcomes on education, that has outcomes in economic development and employment. And we really believe that a housing first strategy and making sure people are stable in their homes is the best way to get someone set up for success. Both of those pandemic relief programs that you alluded to, the Homeowner Assistance Fund and Emergency Rental Assistance, are now closed out. We're working through the pipeline with Homeowner Assistance Fund. ERA is closed, Emergency Rental Assistance. Right now, if you have constituents that call, please still send them our way. We have other resources, though not as vast as what we got during the pandemic, where we can refer them to nonprofit agencies that work with us around the state to administer the almost $3 million that we get annually in what's called the Emergency Solutions Grant that we get from HUD. It's 100th of what we had, in our arsenal during the pandemic, but it is still there for people who need it. I've talked to a lot of our nonprofit partners, and while they were grateful for the assistance that we got, there's still more need. And so we're always advocating at the federal level to get more resources to put towards rental assistance, to put towards homeownership assistance. One of the interesting things about Mississippi is we were a hardest hit fund state in the wake of the financial crisis in 08 and 09. And so we had the hardest hit fund, which was to help homeowners. We were one of a handful of states, I think almost 20 states, that administered that. And then the Homeowner Assistance Fund came on the tail end of that. And so we've actually been administering mortgage assistance at the Home Corporation for going on 16 years now. There's a constant need for that. Not everybody's situation is one of constant employment and regularly made mortgage payments. And preserving homeownership, especially in a state like Mississippi where homeownership rates are higher than the national average, is certainly something that we want to continue to do at the agency. As far as our other programs go, our regular mortgage revenue bond program, where we provide $7,000 of down payment assistance for first-time home buyers, that continues apace. We issue about $5 million in mortgages every week. The only thing keeping the handbrake on that program right now is supply. There is no affordable supply for first-time home buyers. Those are always, or almost always, existing homes. As people move up into new construction, first-time home buyers move in. Home builders just aren't building at that level, and that's not just in Mississippi, that's everywhere. Every counterpart of mine in all 50 states is having the same issue, no matter what, whether they're an urban state, rural state, big state, small state. The tax credit program continues to be oversubscribed at a rate of about 4-to-1 in Mississippi, and we use low-income housing tax credits to subsidize rental housing for people who make 60% and below of the area median income. And that was one of the things you asked me to talk about today, was the state housing tax credit. And Senator Horn, I know he's not here yet, introduced, I don't know if he actually introduced a bill, but he at least drafted a bill last year to create a state housing tax credit. There are several states who have done so. Housing has gotten more expensive to build. Materials, labor, land, and other costs have done nothing but go up. They've stabilized. They don't continue to go up, but they are at a rate now, and I've been doing this for a while. If you'll allow me a slight, rabbit trail to run down just to set the table. There are two federal housing tax credits that we administer at the Home Corporation. One is the 9% credit and one is the 4% credit. The shorthand is multiply it by 10. So the 9% credit covers 90% of your cost, roughly, eligible cost. The 4% credit covers 40%. Used to be 9% tax credit deals, which is the limited credit, the competitive credit. We get about 8 or 9 million in credits every year. Those deals didn't need any help. The deals that needed help were the 4% credit deals, because there's not as much equity coming from the sale of the tax credits. It doesn't cover as much of your development. And so we use soft funds like the home partnership grant from HUD, agency resources to help get those deals done. The cost of housing has gone up so much now that our 9% credit deals, which used to be, the fat deals, now they're so thin they need subsidy, which is why over the past few years, especially, there's been more attention paid in states to putting in state resources to subsidize those or to enhance those federal resources to make sure they get done. Because really nobody's building in this space except with these programs. These are market rate homes and apartments are not being built. The housing tax credit is responsible for about 80% of what we would call affordable housing new construction. In Mississippi, we put, and that also goes for rehabilitation. So we put about 2/3 of our resources statewide towards rehabilitating existing affordable housing and then doing new construction in areas where we see job growth, where we see good schools, and where we see not as much affordable housing supply. So that would be the need for the program. And I'm happy to just get into a dialogue and answer any questions anybody might have about that.
Thank you, Mr. Spivey. You too have also always been very responsive to anything that I have, any needs for constituents. So I do appreciate you're doing a really good job. You mentioned the 9% credit being responsible for 9% of the cost. What cost are you referring to? The closing cost for the getting into the purchase and the mortgage, or ancillary costs, or can you?
So the 9% credit is for the construction of affordable rental housing. And so this is a dollar for dollar reduction in federal tax liability that is good for 10 years, which is why I use the 10% multiplier. And then they sell that usually to banks quite frankly, who need to reduce their federal tax liability. In Mississippi, it's around 80 cents on the dollar. So the math gets more complicated. So it's 9% of your eligible cost for 10 years. So that's 90%, but then it's not dollar for dollar. It's actually reduced by 80 cents on the dollar. And so they take that equity, that cash, and they use that for the construction costs and acquisition costs. And then they're only responsible for carrying a mortgage that's equal to the balance, because
Okay.
they can only charge rent. Their rents are limited to 60% of the area median income based on family size and below. So they're building market rate apartments with amenities that we incentivize them to use, but they can't charge the rents that the market would bring. So they, by charging, anywhere from $300 to $500 less than the market would bring, they're able to hit that affordable spot so that people at 60% of the area median income and below can afford a nice apartment.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Scott, with that rental assistance and the mortgage assistance, do you know in numbers how many people were able to be assisted with the rental and how many people were able to be assisted with the mortgage?
I did not bring my board package with me, but I can get that report. That we'll update that report for our board meeting on the 13th, and those numbers will be in there. But I can get them to the committee. That's not a problem.
Okay, and Senator Horn has come and he was talking about the state tax bill, Senator Horn, that you had introduced. So can you share with us?
Thank you, Madam Chair. On last year, after hearing from developers as well as the folks at Home Corp, that we're having a lot of challenges in doing affordable housing because of the increased cost of labor and the cost of materials, just trying to find ways to cover that gap. Just about every developer is having an issue with the gap. They're also having an issue with affordable housing insurance, just finding insurance that can be acquired in the marketplace that they can afford. That's becoming a real big issue. But of course, the affordability, the cost of labor and materials is equally as important. So I just decided, I know that there's some other states that have state low-income housing tax credits that they employ, and taking a page from the new market tax credit program that we have here in the state, which mimics the federal new market tax credit program. I thought it would be a good idea to have a state low-income housing tax credit program as well. And a lot of the developers who are members of the Mississippi Affordable Housing Program are supportive of the idea of a state LIHTC program. We had a meeting on last year with the chairman of finance concerning the program. We had a good dialogue, but at the point where I introduced the bill we were halfway through the session. Before, I think it was a couple of days before the general bill deadline. So, or the revenue bill deadline. But I just think that it's something that the state needs to participate in. Scott has expressed some support for the program. I'd love to hear from him about it, and to also hear whether anything's changed in the last year since we put the bill out there.
Scott, would you respond, please?
Sure, thank you. Right, so the problem now that I alluded to with gaps in both sides of the federal low-income housing tax credit, both the 9% and the 4%, is that the gap funding is, too little butter spread over too much bread. It's just too thin. The Home Investment Partnership Grant that we administer has to cover homeowner rehab, and this year we had over 90 applications from municipalities that had identified usually elderly citizens in their jurisdictions whose homes had fallen into disrepair, who needed it. We were able to fund less than 20 of those. It covers the rental. It's going to cover a down payment assistance program for people at 80% or less of AMI. And so that resource isn't getting any bigger, right, from HUD. It's staying where it's at. And there is no substitute for it. The state housing tax credit would come in and lower state tax liability the same way that the federal tax liability is written off with the federal tax credit. And they would sell those credits and get equity. Usually it's at a lower rate. Usually it's 50 or 60 cents on the dollar instead of 80 or 90. And use that cash as the equity to fill those gaps. Now that sounds like the state's losing money, only getting, 50 or 60 cents on the dollar of worth of gap filler for every dollar in tax liability, but these don't exist in a vacuum, right? There's construction jobs, there's construction wages. A study that was done in Georgia, which Georgia had completely paused their 4% tax credit production. Their executive director is a good friend of mine. And they have a more recent state housing tax credit. And the study there showed that they get $5.79 worth of economic development spending for every dollar of state housing tax credit that they put into deals. And so there ends up being more bang for the buck than just the equity that's coming into the deals. There's always a broader economic impact with job creation, construction wages, and ancillary spending because these don't exist in a vacuum. And so we think that it would be a good investment on the part of the state.
Do you know whether there are other states besides Georgia who have the state tax credit?
Oh, there's probably around 20 or 30 states that have a state housing tax credit. Some form of, I know South Carolina has one. I know North Carolina is discussing one. Like I said, Georgia is, the reason I brought up Georgia was because they actually did an economic impact study with one of the major universities there to bring it about, that was brought to Senator Horn's attention and my attention, that we can actually put numbers on it. And there are various groups that are going around the country, checking with every state that doesn't have a state housing credit to see what the legislative appetite for that is. And I know that there's a lot of things that go on in this building, and this is one issue among very many that everybody, not only on this committee, but everybody that works in the building has to consider. But as Senator Horn was talking about, with insurance costs going up, like I was talking about production costs going up, and demand for affordable housing going up, we're going to have to address production.
And Senator Horn has that study from Georgia. Or can you provide it to
He
him?
does. I can
Okay.
forward it to him.
Okay, that
A
would be-
colleague of ours sent it to both of us. That's
Okay.
where I dug it up from last year.
That would be great. What does the, if anything, does the Mississippi Home Corps do in terms of addressing homelessness across the state?
So the Emergency Solutions Grant that I talked about, that is the specific grant that deals with homelessness. Those funds can be used for rapid rehousing. They can be used to pay for rent and utilities for people who are in danger of becoming homelessness. It can also pay for street outreach. And they're usually spent by the third quarter of every year because there's just not enough to go around. The problem that we have with building non-congregate shelters is always going to be operating cost, right? So we could, issue a large grant to fund a non-congregate shelter in an area that wants it, an area that needs it, where you've got beds, where you've got rooms. But without an ongoing funding stream, without a stream that can pay for, I'm going to assume that it's going to be tax exempt or very little taxes paid, but you've got utility costs, you've got staff costs, transportation costs are often going to be part of this because, it's not jail. People need to be able to get to jobs, to job interviews, to healthcare, things like that. Those ongoing costs, a lot of the nonprofit partners that we talk to, that's where they struggle to pencil this out. Is we can help on the construction side and on the lending side, but we can't help with a continuing revenue stream. And that's where it tends to fall down.
And, okay, John, just a second. And we don't look at creating any kind of individual homes for the homeless.
No.
It's always congregate.
Well, it's a non-congregate shelter, but in a multifamily setting. Right, right. What you're talking about is kind of the tiny home model.
Right.
Right. Right now, zoning's always going to be an issue with that. And you're still going to have the problem of ongoing costs. I mean, you still have to run water, power, sewer, whether it's a tiny home or whether it's a large building. I know, New Orleans has a few different types of these facilities that I've toured where they get a revenue stream from the city or the state that basically keeps it open, that, the New Orleans Housing Authority and the Federal Home Loan Bank of Dallas were responsible for kind of the building it out, but then they step away and then the city or the state takes over after that.
And this, everything that we're talking about are federal dollars.
No, not always. I mean, everything that we're using, yes, are federal dollars.
And so it's, I guess it's a competitive process to receive these monies?
Yes, it is. We're always oversubscribed on our grants.
Okay, Senator Horn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to flip the questions. I had another question, but when you mentioned tiny homes, I thought about the second question that I wanted to ask, which is about tiny homes. And have you seen where in other states it has really become a solution for homelessness?
I have not. I have not seen anything produced on, a large scale. There's been pilot programs, but nothing where I've seen where you could just take it off the shelf and put it into larger production. I know some of the larger state housing finance agencies, which is what our sister agencies are in other states, have even experimented with buying the 3D printers, for houses. I know that that's a pilot. I'm looking forward to seeing my colleague from Virginia next week at a meeting that we've got convening to ask her how that went. But they invested, several millions of dollars to get one of those large 3D printers that can print a house in a few days and then outfit it. But nothing that's really gone into production on a large scale.
Speaking of 3D printers, there was an article on the news about this guy who, it was on 60 Minutes, a guy who had come up with an invention, of a large invention that just not only printing homes and buildings, commercial buildings, but they've been tasked with doing the 3D printing on Mars for housing development. But they talked about how economical it is. Once you get past the cost of the 3D printer, how economical it is to actually produce a home that folks can actually live in, and they're energy efficient, they're insect repellent, they're hermetically sealed, so to speak, so you don't get a lot of impurities in. But do you have any idea what the cost of one of those printers might be?
I don't off the top of my head.
Well, you mentioned ESG, the Emergency Solutions Grant, and rapid rehousing. If there's one complaint that I hear about ESG from folks who are in that business, is the there's not enough money for rapid rehousing. And can you speak to that a little bit?
I can, yeah. So it's, again, it becomes a matter of too much demand and not enough supply. The state gets about 2.8 million in ESG, and one of the things we learned over the pandemic, and again, it was exacerbated because of the pandemic, but there's still demand for rapid rehousing dollars. I was speaking to one of our nonprofits in the Delta, and she said, we've got, families living in cars, we've got, kids that are having to, get ready for school in gas station bathrooms before they go to school. Where are the resources? And I'm like, well, the resources are what they are. We're back to pre-pandemic levels of resources. And there's such a demand that they always get spent by the third quarter of the year, so that in the later months, October, November, December, everybody's waiting on their next grant award already, and they're not able to rehouse people as quickly as they would like to.
Are you familiar with the pilot program the city of Jackson is working on tiny homes?
Is that the manufactured homes?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm familiar with it to a degree, yes.
Any opinions about it?
I don't know enough about it to have an opinion about it.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Vice Chairman Butler.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just kind of a question about, you keep saying about pre-pandemic, when we had the pandemic, we had a lot more money to do the rehabs and get the monies that we needed. My question is, when we got those kind of monies, the people that benefited from that, did they get cut off or were they able to stay on? That makes sense.
It does make sense. And, what we had done on the homeowner side was we had reduced the amount of ongoing payments on this side of the pandemic and limited the program to what we call reinstatement. So if people had lost their job and then they had gone back to work and they just couldn't catch up, most people don't have several mortgage payments worth of savings. We were able to make that reinstatement payment and make sure that they're current, on their utilities, current. And with rental assistance, it did just end. People were entitled to a certain amount, and we would send out notices and let people know, okay, you're about to be responsible for your rent again. You're about to be responsible for your utilities again. And so it did just end. And hopefully, in most of those cases, they were able to stay. And that was, but like I said, those programs just ended.
Do you have any kind of percentage of the rental versus the mortgage assistance that, you had at that time versus now?
As far as the amounts of
Yes.
assistance, yeah, I mean, the emergency rental assistance was over 3 times as large as the homeowner assistance fund. And so it was a vast amount of money between ERA 1 and ERA 2 as opposed to the homeowner assistance fund. So I know that there was a lot more money spent on utilities and rent for renters than there was. As far as numbers, I'd have to check my report and get back to you on that.
Okay, and also one other question. I think we had some rental system money. Is that the money that the governor sent back?
There was.
Am I getting confused on this?
Well, there was, okay, so it's a little, there's the devil's always in the details. So ERA 1 had to have a direct relation, the impact had to be directly related to COVID-19. ERA 2 did not. So ERA 1, what we found was when that program ended was there was money left because the statutory deadline had hit and people didn't have direct related COVID related hardships is what we called it. What define your hardship? Lost my job, kids couldn't go to school, so I had to stay home. So I lost my job or lost my hourly wages. And so there was around 20 million that was sent back. And that was because that program just expired. They weren't going to extend it. ERA 2 was different. ERA 2 did not have to be directly related to COVID. And the state was able to keep about $6 million of that money to put towards other affordable housing purposes.
And it was used?
It is being used, yes.
Still being used.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
In ER2, none of the money was sent back.
That's correct.
And so the total amount that was actually sent back was the 6 million that
The 23.
the 23 million
Right.
that was ER1 because we could not, the people could not prove that there was a direct relationship with their hardship with COVID.
Right. I mean, the vaccines had come out. People weren't getting sick as often. They weren't getting as sick. You know, and so that one had a very short timeline on it. And so that one expired.
Okay, and you said that you have $6 million left for the ER2, and we were able to keep that.
That's correct.
Thank you. Senator Horn?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Scott, when you said, you struck a nerve when you mentioned the fact that the rental assistance had shut down 2 days ago. I was talking with some constable and law enforcement friends of mine, excuse me, and they were telling me that they had a meeting on Monday to talk about the fact that a bunch of eviction notices are getting ready to go out. And this is in Hinds County. I don't know if they're experiencing the same thing in other counties, but Hinds County being the largest county, the most requests for assistance came from Hinds County during the pandemic and post-pandemic. And yet here we are about to see these waves of evictions go forward. I don't know why that is, whether folks got used to rental assistance covering that cost and they did something else with the money, or if they just didn't have the money, or what's going on with that. But have you all looked at that, and are you preparing for any sort of a reaction or response to the evictions?
I mean, it's been so long since it's been over a year since, you know, the rental assistance program was shut down. We haven't been made aware. It has been brought to our attention that there's a potential wave of evictions coming.
But if there is, do you have any resources that can address that?
Again, you know, the rapid rehousing dollars and the tenant-based rental assistance is going to be part of the home ARP amount once the plan is approved. But again, the emergency solutions grant, we're waiting on HUD for contracts for the dollars. That could be December/January. Home ARP, you know, still looking at, you know, final approval for the plan. Those are the resources that we have at our disposal.
Scott, I think you mentioned 2/3 of the monies now go for rehabbing the existing properties. Are these those single home lease purchase, or are these multi-family units, or both?
Right. So the rehab dollars are going towards multifamily properties that need to be rehabbed. The single family lease purchase, we're working with developers to make improvements before those sales contracts are put in place. So that the homeowner, if they're in a position to buy, that they're going to purchase a home that's in good shape, that can pass inspection, that has, you know, a good roof on it, good HVAC, fresh coat of paint, things like that. Those are just now getting to year 15, 16, 17. There were a lot of those that were built post-Katrina. Those aren't in that rehab portfolio. You know, the owners want to sell as many of those as they can. And we certainly want to facilitate that. We want to facilitate the transition to homeownership. A lot of times we hear from people, I know you hear from your constituents, and I hear from your constituents, that they've been living there for 15 years and they're ready to buy this house. And we want to make sure that we can do everything we can to facilitate it. Everything from making sure that improvements are made to making sure that the loan product that they use is something that's safe. And then also at post-purchase education has been a big topic because, as you know, one of the problems in 08 and 09, and one of the reasons that low-income and minority communities were so adversely affected by the housing crisis was because predatory lenders had come in and talked a lot of first-generation homeowners into spending their equity, and they didn't have the equity built up. And so we feel like post-purchase education, especially when we're talking about, you know, a low-income family who's lived in the single-family home, lease purchase home for 15 years, knowing that they're going to buy it at the end, we need to, you know, really talk to them about how that equity gets treated, because there's going to be equity built into that home the minute they buy, right? The purchase price is going down, down, down with every rent payment that they make. And so there's going to be oftentimes, you know, $40,000 or $50,000 worth of equity in that home. That's great. That's multi-generational wealth. That's you know, that's something that can be passed down. That's what we want. But we want to make sure that people understand that, you know, not everybody has their best interests at heart and can come in and make them make some adverse decisions that, you know, can be precarious in the future.
So are you all going to keep an inventory of the number of homes that have been converted from lease to purchase?
We are. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And my last question is related to the utility assistance. Again, when our constituents call us about needing monies, do we send them to the CAP agencies? Where do we send them?
That is run by the Department of Human Services in Mississippi. We
Okay.
don't get the LIHEAP dollars. Some HFAs, you know, we're a weird animal. We're different in every state. You know, housing finance agencies like the Home Corporation, for example, just to the west, you know, Louisiana Housing Corporation runs LIHEAP for the state. In Mississippi, I think it's Department of Human Services. runs
Okay,
it.
so when you all were providing the utility assistance, that was just during the pandemic?
And that was, right, those were emergency rental assistance dollars because that was an eligible cost. And we just, you know, it was easier to be a one-stop shop. You know, I mean, that was one of the things that we learned was, you know, people who are about to be evicted, even though there's a moratorium, there were always threats for eviction, and people who couldn't pay their rent and were scared. I didn't need to send them running down the street to another agency. They didn't need to talk to 3 or 4 people. They needed help right then. And so
Mhm.
that's why we handle it. And we use those ERA dollars to cover that and the homeowner assistance fund dollars to cover it. We don't have any ongoing rental assistance. We don't have any
Utility
ongoing
assistance.
utility assistance. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions of the committee members? Well, Scott, thank you so much for providing us with the information today. And I'd like to thank the committee members for attending, and also to thank you all for allowing me to be your chairman for the last 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you
This
to the
meeting is
committee.
adjourned.